Hi everybody, welcome back. In this video, we are going to talk about the fully diminished 7th chord and dig deeper into how this chord can be enharmonically reinterpreted to modulate into distantly related keys. Today, we are going to write our own progression that modulates using this process, so you will know how to create your own modulating progression using the enharmonic reinterpretation of a fully diminished 7th chord. We are also going to talk about analysis. We're going to look at a phrase of music that modulates using this procedure, and I'll talk to you about how to recognize that process when it's happening and how to label it successfully in your analysis. Before we get into that, let's quickly review the symmetry of this chord. The fully diminished 7th chord is symmetrical, and by that I mean that it is built up of minor third intervals all the way. And that symmetry allows it to sound like other fully diminished 7th chords. For example, the B fully diminished 7th chord sounds like D fully diminished 7th, which sounds like F fully diminished, which also sounds like G sharp fully diminished. Now they're spelled differently because they would likely resolve in different ways. The B fully diminished would probably resolve to C. The D fully diminished would go to E flat. It could go to E flat major or minor. The F fully diminished would open the door for the potential to go into the key of G flat major, probably. G sharp fully diminished would open the door to get into the key of A. Okay, so now that we're armed with that basic information, how do we actually use it? Let's take a look at a progression that starts in the key of C major, and let's see where we can take this. So I've written a few chords here that basically just establish C major. 1, then a 2-4-2, going to a 5-6-5, and back to 1. And then I expand the tonic further with a B fully diminished. That's a 7-6-5, which would probably go up to 1-6. So what do we do from there? Well, as the composer, I've made a decision right now that I'm going to go back to B fully diminished 7. And this time I'm going to put F in the bass, but really that's not terribly important. What's going to happen is that I'm going to go back to the fully diminished 7th chord that we had back here. But this time, I'm going to thwart the listener's expectation, and rather than going to the C chord that we did right here, I'm going to enharmonically reinterpret this B fully diminished 7th chord to be a different fully diminished 7th chord. I can take any one of the notes in this chord and pretend that that is the root. So I'm going to choose F as the root, and I'm going to interpret this as a F fully diminished 7th chord, unbeknownst to the listener. And if this is indeed an F fully diminished, then I could very easily just resolve it to the key of G flat. I'm going to go to a G flat major chord there. And at this point, I just stay in the key of G flat, and I've modulated a tritone away simply by pivoting on this one fully diminished 7th chord that could function in both keys. So how do we write this in our analysis? Please remember, your analysis should always reflect what the listener hears rather than what you see on paper. What I mean by that is, even though this is going to be an F fully diminished 7th chord, the listener will still hear it as B fully diminished because they don't realize where it's about to go. So we want to analyze this as a 7-4-3 in the old key, because that's how it will be felt to the listener. But we are also going to write that this is functioning as a 7 fully diminished 7 in the key of G flat. So we'll put our pivot box here, a G flat there, and then when this F goes up to G flat, we can see what's happening, and our analysis reflects that pivot relationship. This chord is simultaneously B fully diminished in second inversion and F fully diminished in root position. And once I resolve into that G flat major chord, it's important that we establish the new key effectively. So I expanded the tonic going to a 1-6 chord, and then just a 2-5-1 progression to really solidify the move into G flat major. Let's hear what this sounds like. It's really effective, right? And I want to point out one of the things that makes this work is that we established a B diminished chord here and then resolved it as the listener would expect it to resolve. I call this baiting the hook, to use a fishing analogy. We're setting up the listener's expectation and then resolving it in the way that they would expect it to resolve. And then when we give them the same enharmonically equivalent chord here, their expectations are even that much more heightened by the fact that they just heard the same thing a minute ago. But then when we resolve unexpectedly, it's that much more satisfying and effective. So the F fully diminished didn't resolve as a B diminished would. It resolved into G flat. Now let's talk about spelling. You don't have any upper voices here to look at. I've just given you a baseline. But I want to point out that this chord here could be spelled in either way, but the analysis would be the same. Remember, we want to analyze this in the way that the listener hears it, and I think the analysis you see on the screen now tells the story. Regardless of how the upper notes are spelled, this is what the listener hears. Let's take a look at a new passage of music. Imagine you were given this phrase and you were asked to analyze this. How would you approach this? Well, let's start by hearing it. Often it helps to write some lead sheet symbols above the staff, so I've done that for the first few chords. We start with the C chord, the next chord is C major with E in the bass, then it moves to a B fully diminished 7th chord with D in the bass, and back to C. This is a fairly standard progression, which would be analyzed as 1 to 1-6, then a leading tone diminished chord in first inversion, which goes right back to 1. Now the next chord, if you're analyzing this, you're probably going to look at the notes on paper and stack those in thirds, and what you get is a D fully diminished 7th chord. You might be tempted to analyze this as some sort of 2 chord perhaps, but that's not the way it's functioning. It's going to an E flat minor chord, so we certainly want to analyze this as a 7 in the key of E flat because that's where the music tends to go, and we stay in E flat the whole time. So this D fully diminished 7th chord is clearly a leading tone. But what you might also miss if you're not aware of this process is that the listener hears this chord differently. You have to understand and realize that this chord enharmonically sounds exactly like the chord they heard back here. So the listener is going to think that this D fully diminished 7th chord is actually B fully diminished. They don't know that the C flat here is written as a C flat. They're going to hear that as B, right? So that's the tricky part. As an analyzer, you have to look at this on paper and imagine how the listener is going to hear it, even though that seems to have some conflict with the way it's spelled in this moment. So here's how we would analyze this. This pivot notation shows that the listener still hears this as B fully diminished, and in that case it would be in a 6/5 inversion because D is in the bass. But after it resolves, the listener then hears it as D fully diminished in root position in the key of E flat minor. And they don't know that until it's actually resolved, but this is the way we would analyze it to show that dual relationship. Once we land on this E flat minor chord, we establish E flat minor conclusively with a tonic expansion and then a predominant, dominant, tonic cadence. Why don't we hear that one last time? After the analysis, you can track all of this as you hear it. And that is Enharmonic Reinterpretation of a Fully Diminished 7th Chord. Thank you for watching.